And welcome to Channel KT4 Local, broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube. You can join in by sending in questions during the show. Just press the communications button on the screen. Don't forget to click the like or share buttons. If you're watching on YouTube, please click to subscribe to Channel KT4. Today I've decided to take a short walk, about 3 miles, along the wonderful Hogs Mill River to KT17. That's Ewell Village, to meet my special guest, Brian Angus, the chairman of Ewell Village Residents Association. Welcome, Brian. The first thing I have to ask you is, what's the update on the swan and the cygnets?
3 cygnets growing nicely on the pond. Fed them this morning. Obviously, earlier on, we lost half the brood and one of the adults. There are some really sweet little ducklings. How they'll survive, I don't know. It was amazing to see them in the mix of the geese fighting for food, and some goslings are growing up. But so far, so good on the cygnets.
That's good. I actually got to see them a little bit, Brian, when I was over in Ewell Village when I went for a walk a couple of weeks ago. And really beautiful to see. And it was really nice to take that wonderful walk along the Hogs Mill as well.
I did warn you last time that you'd need your passport, didn't I?
Yeah, you were quite right for that. And I have to say, just between you and I, Brian, that by the time Susan and I had walked home, my little legs were feeling a little bit tired. I think I need to do a lot more walking.
Yeah.
Right, tell me a little bit about your relationship with Ewell, Brian, which spans, I believe, around something like 30 years.
Yes, I've never lived more than 3 miles from Sutton. So I went to school in Epsom, Nescott. And so, yes, I've lived in Ewell for 30 years, been a councillor, I've been the mayor, and part of the Residents Association for that length of time.
It's a lot of years, that, Brian. I'm really interested to know a little bit more about the relationship between the Residents Association and that of the borough and county councillors. Does the Residents Association just stick to matters concerning Epsom and Ewell Borough Council and Surrey County Council, or does it do other things as well?
Let me take that in 2 chunks. I know when you interviewed Natalie a couple of weeks ago, she explained that we're unusual in Epsom and Ewell in that the Residents Associations are allowed to sponsor councillors for election. And we do that. We do that to the county and to the borough, and we've been doing it for 90 years. But it is easy to forget that the residents are very concerned about a whole lot of things. Now, our borough councillors are brilliant. You throw a problem at them, they will find out who can help about it. But the Residents Association equally has to. So I'll find myself chasing up a whole lot of different things. We'll probably cover those further down, but that's why the residents are concerned about a whole lot of stuff, not just the things that are dealt with by those 2 councils.
So what is the makeup of the Residents Association?
The residents associations, and I have to make sure we don't confuse people, because the Residents Association has sort of different bodies that allow them to talk to each other. The residents associations in Ewell Village, we have 2,400 residents here, and we have traditionally stayed in touch with them with newsletters and public meetings. Sorry, back to the question. What we?
That's okay, Brian. Now, this is kind of like, do they just stick with borough and Surrey County councillors matters, or do they get outside of that box as well? I think you answered the question by saying yes. There's a lot of other matters that are going on at this particular moment in time. Let me just say one thing, over here on the dark side at Cuddington Ward, right? We have the situation whereby we've got the Cuddington Residents Association and the Residents Association of Cuddington. Yes. That's a bit like a Life of Brian thing, that.
Okay, well, so, on the housing, when they built all the hospital cluster houses, the developers formed a residents association, which was there to give the residents association voice when things hadn't been, the verges hadn't been properly reinstated, things like that they could deal with. And the traditional resident associations are also covering it, and we get ourselves involved in the politics. We will, as I say, we'll get councillors selected and hopefully elected. So they're the two run alongside, and probably that's what's happening in Cuddington.
Right. I think one's dealing with the political side, and the other is dealing with the residents' association as an association in its own way. So it's slightly different. I've come
across resident associations when if I go to a country fair somewhere, and I snidle up to them and I say, "You'll never guess what happens in Epsom and Ewell. We actually sponsor councillors, select them," and they say, "Oh, that sounds very good, but I think our constitution forbids us to doing that." They say.
Yeah.
So it's a very well kept secret that I'd like the whole world to know, that residents' associations can sponsor councillors and they can go through to the borough council. That doesn't mean that when they have to take compromises and decisions with resident associations for other wards, that I agree with every decision. And so we're very much focused on what your village wants, and there'll be political debate between the various parts of the resident association.
Okay, can we just have a look at this? I've got a little picture here, a graphic, and there it is. That's Ewell Ward. I hope everybody can see that quite clearly. But when I was looking at it, and also when I came over to visit you, I noticed there that that's where the Hogsmill River rises, and it then goes right the way down to the tributary, which is the Thames at Kingston upon Thames.
Absolutely. I worked out that therefore Ewell must have been a place where people would want to live ever since the Ice Age. And sure enough, I found that there are Saxon remains in the archaeology. And you see the London Road. The Romans, the Romans only ever do straight roads. Well, they thought, oh, this is a useful spring. Perhaps we'll break our rule and we'll let it bend round so we can drop in on Ewell on our way through.
Yeah, that's a good idea. The other thing about it is I also live on the Hogsmill River, down at Worcester Park, and that river really does rise on occasions. If you get a particularly rainy period, then the river can rise quite a lot. And of course, when we get the equinox, the river can rise. I was trying to work out, how does that affect the village at Ewell? Because it all seems to be, the river seems to be quite high there, and I would expect there could be quite a bit of flooding. And if there's flooding, do we also suffer? Are there any sewerage issues and all that sort of stuff?
Yes, Graham. I've become a bit of a river geek. How long have I got?
Okay, excellent.
The simple way of describing it, if you look at the borough crest, I'm not sure I have one handy, I probably have there. If you look at the borough crest, you'll see the rain falling on Epsom and Ewell, on Epsom Downs, and coming out of the chalk at Ewell. That's what that emblem is all about. So the way I tell it is that the level we're enjoying now is the level from 7 months ago, whereas the water that comes down from the Stew Pond via Longmead, that fluctuates instantly. There's a downpour. So we're enjoying some nice clear flow at the moment because of the very wet winter we have, and the fact there's been no rain for the last few months hasn't affected our water flow here. But we have had flooding. I think if you Google Brian Angus Ewell, you'll see me standing in the middle by the bus stop, up to my legs, carrying my little dog under my arm out the water. So it does fluctuate from the Hogsmill storm, and just to make it worse, Thames Water put into swimming pool shaped sized tanks at Ewell Court and 4 up at Longmead. And if there's so much water flowing into that, it overtops. And instead of a lovely, rare, valuable chalk stream, you get sewage pumped into the river by the time it reaches you.
Wow, that's quite amazing. There's a nice little, I have here a wonderful little mosaic. And this is looking at Ewell Village in 1927, and that was the very year that the Residents Association was formed in Ewell Village. Am I correct in that?
That's right. I made up this display, and going around, you can see what the village looked like back then. You'll see it was always an electric line, so you'll see an electric train there. You'll see a view of the high street. You'll see how the milk was delivered. You'll see an event up by the jail, and I think that's Mr. Glynn is standing in the forecourt there. Further up, you'll see in the top right, that embankment is where the railway goes, and you'll see it was flooded. There was a pond, a lake there, and you'll see kids paddling in the horse pond, and I think somewhere around there's a photo of elephants from a circus being washed off there. So yes, we put that display around to celebrate our 90th anniversary.
No, it's an absolutely amazing mosaic that you put together there, Brian. Really, I really enjoyed looking at that picture, and it would be really good to see the same picture today and try and kind of like put them together.
By the magic, I'll try and do this for you. Can you see that? Can your viewers see that?
Yes, they can.
The photo below and the new recreated photo above, with the same kids lifted out by magic.
Wow, that's very clever, Brian.
I'm full of them. What else do you want?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Am I allowed to wear different hats at different stages, or are we going to leave that?
I've heard all about these different hats. So if you want to show me a hat, go on, let's do a hat. There we go.
That's the Mad Hatter hat.
That's Brian the Mad Hatter. Right, good. Okay. Right, now let's have a look. There are a couple of projects going on, Brian.
Oh, yeah, sorry, back to business.
Yeah, back to business now. We'll have another hat in a minute, okay? But in the meantime, we've got to talk about some of the projects that are going on in Ewell Village. And one of them is all about Grove Arch, which you're very keen on having this work done. I've got a picture for you, which I'm going to show you. There it is.
Okay. So it matters a lot to the residents of Ewell Village that the high street thrives. And we've tried to work hard on special events that get cooperation and special events. It's going to be especially difficult when COVID comes across. Now, Tracy Dell led this work for a while, and she managed to get significant amount of money out of Tesco's. And the thought is that we could have this beautifully blacksmithed arch with motifs of Ewell on it. We now learn that we need planning permission. So that's an interesting challenge. We have to make sure that it fits in, its craftsmanship fits in with it being Ewell being a conservation area. So we got the money. The planning permission is the next thing, and there are several hoops you have to jump through for planning permission, and rightly so. We want it to be of quality. So yes, watch that space. Okay,
it looks a great project, and the best of luck with the planning committee, and hopefully everything will come together as you want to do it. Can you explain the difficulties for Ewell West residents wanting to access the station? You sent me a picture, and I thought I'd let you have a look at it.
Oh, right. So there is Ewell West Station. The railway people have very kindly spent several £1 million on a bridge with lifts, which gets you from platform to platform. But because this station and the road, the Chessington Road, was designed 150 plus years ago, and that was, remember, before the motor car, it's impossible for anyone to get through from Glyn School without going up some very steep slopes. The ramp that comes down from Ewell West is again steeper than it would be allowed now. So again, I've done my drawings of how a ramp can be fitted in that's shallower, and how I'd love those steps to be replaced with a foot tunnel, so that the access to the station is as good as the access when you get within it. But it's an expensive long-term project. I even had difficulty getting anyone to tell me what the cost would be. So we work on lots of things, not all we win.
No, it's again, it's a very useful project, and I didn't appreciate that the obviously the whole thing was designed before motor cars. So
well, the interesting thought is that Crossrail 2 is coming through. Now, Crossrail is obviously horrendously delayed, and that might put the politicians off. But if this railway is increased to the standards of Crossrail 2, will that mean the whole bridge being demolished? I don't know, like a possible opportunity, but it might take decades to happen.
Just something, Brian, there's much work going on regarding proposals for a new hospital. I know you've been following this for some time. Are you rooting for it to be built in Epsom?
I should do, shouldn't I? But I've never lived more than 3 miles from Sutton, so I know both St Helier and Epsom well, and I know what a dreadful state part of Epsom is and what a dreadful state St Helier is. And I'm afraid my theory is that while the local politicians and the MPs have been arguing for decades about put the new hospital in St Helier or put it in Epsom, it hasn't happened. So now there's a major consultation, and I fear that if we keep fighting, we won't get it. And I think you've got another graphic in a minute which shows the argument about why actually it should go in Sutton. So the first one says if you don't change, and there you see a huge red block with a little £22 million deficit ongoing. If you see that you put it in Epsom, then yes, there's a surplus of 11 million, but you'll see that the amount of people it's serving, the columns are slightly lower. St Helier slightly better, but Sutton has a better surplus, and it's because the columns are taller, it's easier. And the other thing about Sutton is because it's being built on a clearer site, it can be up and running in 4 years, rather than I think the other two options will take a lot longer than that. Of course, we've seen the wonderful news that Headley Court has been transformed into a hospital. There was an interesting graphic that we saw, which was they only need 7 more beds looking into the future. I think I forget the figures, about 3,000, and the before and after the difference is just 7 beds. But the COVID thing has shown that hospital beds are sometimes needed. But that's my argument. Stop arguing for one location or the other. Go with what is most likely to be done.
Here's some interesting graphics for us to have a look at about the proposed new builds.
Yeah, there they have showed us that any of the 3 possibilities is possible. There you see up top is Epsom Hospital. I think the top one's Epsom, with it being built on the car park. The bottom one is the new site at Sutton, Royal Marsden, and that's in open space. And the one in the middle is the well-known shape of St Helier. I get shivers every time I think of St Helier, and there are the buildings that they could build to make it happen there.
I tend to agree with you about St Helier, by the way.
The logic used to be make sure the hospital is near to me so I can get to it quickly in an ambulance. And so it was location, location, location. But I think what we ought to be thinking is that outcomes trump location. If your life is saved by a specialist hospital that had all the right consultants to deal with your particularly complicated mix of things that all of a sudden went wrong, then you'll be pleased that you survived. And the fact that the ambulance took you to one hospital rather than another, and that your visitors had some difficulty getting to you, will matter less. Now, of course, with this COVID thing, we've had the nightmare where people can't visit their loved ones. Things that we were thinking 6 months ago have been so turned on their head. It's just amazing.
It is indeed. Brian, before we go any further, I think it's time for another hat.
Oh, yes. Okay. That's my waterproof hat.
Oh, that's a good one.
Nice
Go on, then I'll let you have one more.
One more. Yeah, okay. Well, my name's Angus. So
Very good. Right, you just started touching on there the changes that have happened in the last 6 months, and it's affected all of us. But just for this moment in time, how do you feel it's affected life in your village?
Well, for the Residents Association, as I think I mentioned earlier, we relied on newsletters, knocking on doors, saying, here, Gov, would you like to give us £3 to support the Residents Association? And we'd get one of two reactions. We'd either get, yes, of course, you guys are doing a wonderful job. Here, take a £5. Or we'd get, oh, go on, rubbish. You're trying to clear the curbs where it's really useful parking, or parking on the grass, or that planning permission you let through almost as if you didn't care. No, you'll never get £3 off me ever again. And that feedback was really useful. And we had public meetings which could be attended by 70 people. So I like to think we had our finger on the pulse. Well, now our road stewards can't get out. We can't hold public meetings. I'm delighted. Thank you for KT4 letting us reach people. We have been using Facebook and we've been getting good answers there, but our residents and we have to think of new ways of doing things and of staying. The problem with Facebook is that it can be viewed in Australia, and we need very much to be locally focused and know it's people in KT171 who are actually communicating with us.
Yeah, I agree. We have to find new ways to do it, and the feedback is really important. I know that I'm a road rep for Old Malden Lane here in Worcester Park, and some of the residents put together a WhatsApp group, which have got probably 5 or 6 houses now, and they're all communicating with one another through that. So I can get bits of feedback using technology as opposed to actually going to knock on the door. So yes, we have to adapt and overcome in these strange times.
And we need a younger generation who are more conversant with that to help us stay in touch, because the challenges going forward, the government has said to the borough council, or to both councils, no, it doesn't matter. You spend whatever it needs to do to look after this problem and deliver meals instead of sending your rangers out into the parks, get them to volunteer, get all these stuff out. The money doesn't matter. What they've stayed silent on is that an awful lot of the income to the councils comes in the borough council. It comes from planning fees, parking, car parks, parking fines, a whole lot of costs, fees and charges, which dwarf the amount we can raise in local taxes and dwarf what the government gives us. And they're staying very silent. They're saying, spend what you need. They aren't. When you ask them, will you reimburse us for the lost income? They go into long sentences that don't quite reach the answer yes.
Yeah, you just mentioned, Brian, about car parks, and obviously it's a good income generation program. But you sent me this picture, and I'm keen to know a little bit more about it.
Okay, so there is Ewell West Station car park. Oh, and incidentally, there's a new accessible bridge there. This is on a working day. These 130 spaces are empty. Normally, they're worth £1,000 a year. But because people are being urged not to use public transport, there's an empty car park. What used to happen was it was filled to overflowing. It would cause us problems by parking on side roads. It meant that the value of a parking space in Ewell was £10,000. It's a commuter village. It's very much the character of the village. Well, now you can't give away parking places. It's great that the air quality is fine. There are no aeroplanes in the sky, but it's a complete rethink on parking.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I hadn't thought of it until we had a while ago when I came over to your village and we met up briefly. That I hadn't thought about the impact of car parking and all those sort of things, and where the income that's generated from it. You sent me another graphic. Now, this is an interesting one. Tell me about this.
Okay, so with a kind lady off university, we rushed around with a tape measure just when people were beginning to do to realise that you need to not to shake hands but to bump elbows, and we tape measured every window in the high street, and there they are. The black and white on the side shows there's 750 meters. Now, surprisingly, only 22% of those are for actually go in and buy something. Grocery was a third, and a lot of them, so 18.5% of them were vacant. 17.5% were where you could go and eat and drink. 17.5% was where you could go because you can't do it on the internet. You can't get your nails done on the internet. 12% of them are offices. 7% are services, and 5% has already been turned. 6% has already been turned to residential. My fear is that even more of this retail will become residential. So the one on the end shows you that if you add up the vacant, the offices, the residential that aren't retail accessible, it was already over a third. And so I'm fearful that the high street will just become residential. And while you've got me going, I think that if you have permission to have an office, then you can turn that office into residential under what's called deemed convention. No, sorry, the phrase has gone from me. But you can just change it without planning permission. And the fear there is that standards of accommodation aren't maintained. You don't have to have windows or balconies. And therefore, I believe there are places above the shops and in some places which I'll use the word slum. There are some places that are very poor condition, and that's what can happen if you allow something to go from retail to office. Then the slip from office to residential is outside the planning permission.
Okay, Brian, I don't know where the time's gone. It's been so much fun talking with you. Nearly 30 minutes has gone by. Okay, we need another hat before I say farewell to you.
This is my favourite, of course.
Oh, excellent. Brian, look, thank you for being such a sport and coming on Channel KT4. It's been great to talk with you. I've learned such a lot about Ewell Village and how its residents association works. I wish you well with all the projects, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Graham, I just have to say that in January I'll have done 10 years and I'll be stepping back. So that's why I'm particularly keen that there are new people step in and see the enthusiasm that we attack the tasks with.
I think that will be Ewell's loss, Brian. Okay, so thanks again, Brian. Great to see you. So coming up in the weeks ahead on Channel KT4, I'm looking forward to visiting the Ginger Cat House Rescue and Refuge charity and the Fulham Football Club Foundation, and maybe even a Surrey County Councillor. So until next Monday at 12:30, stay well and stay safe.